Chapter 1: Ink and Iron. The rain in Chang'an smelled of charcoal and wet stone, clinging to the narrow alleys of the western market like a persistent shadow. It mirrored the mood that clung to Li-Chen, a damp, uncomfortable feeling of being perpetually just out of reach. He hunched deeper into his worn wool shawl, attempting to shield the delicate calligraphy brush from the unrelenting drizzle, meticulously rendering a scene of a blossoming plum branch for a copper coin. The work was tedious, the coins paltry, but the silence was a welcome balm against the cacophony of the market, the hawkers' cries, the braying of pack mules, the incessant chatter of merchants haggling over silk and spices. Li-Chen hadn't chosen this life. Not exactly. Had meticulously planned it, a calculated retreat from the viper's nest that was the Li house. The Li house, with its sprawling warehouses filled with jade and porcelain, its silk merchants whose fingers were stained with gold, and its influence that stretched often brutally into the very heart of the Imperial court. He, Li-Chen, was the last scion, the sole heir to a dynasty that had bankrolled the emperor for decades, subtly manipulating trade routes and bolstering the imperial treasury. But the dynasty was drowning in its own wealth, consumed by poisonous ambition, and Li-Chen, with a scholar's mind and a growing distaste for the endless bloodshed, had decided he needed to disappear. Had spent months studying the art of the common folk, absorbing their mannerisms, their speech, their very scent. Had discarded his fine silks for rough-spun cotton, traded his polished boots for worn leather sandals, and learned to speak in the clipped, practical tones of the market traders. Had even adopted a new name, Li, a humble moniker that hinted at nothing of his lineage. Now, he was simply a street artist, a Wenren, a painter of words, scratching out images of cherry blossoms and ancient poems for a few copper coins, a shadow amongst shadows. The irony wasn't lost on him. He possessed a power that could shatter stone, a martial art whispered to draw lightning from the sky, the Azure Dragon Fist. Passed down through generations of Li houses, it was a technique of devastating precision and raw energy, perfected over centuries of grueling training and fueled by a core of concentrated spiritual power. It was a dangerous legacy, one that attracted the attention of warlords, assassins, and the emperor's own guard. To remain hidden, he had to suppress it, to channel the dragon within into a quiet, unassuming current. The disruption came in the form of General Zhao, son of the powerful warlord Zhao Lian, who controlled the western territories and regularly levied exorbitant taxes on Chang'an's merchants. Zhao was a brutish man, all muscle and arrogance, with a particular fondness for humiliating those he deemed beneath him. He treated Li-Chen with a contempt that bordered on sadistic amusement. "Look at this, Wenren," Zhao boomed, his voice cutting through the market's din as he strode past Li-Chen's stall, a contingent of heavily armed guards flanking him. "Eh." A man with ink-stained hands attempting to capture the beauty of a plum blossom. Pathetic dot. You wouldn't be able to hold a sword, let alone a dragon. He deliberately kicked Li-Chen's paint stand, sending a scattering of brushes and pigments across the cobblestones. Li-Chen didn't flinch. He calmly began to gather his scattered materials, his movements precise and economical. Had learned to hold his temper, to absorb the insult, to let it dissipate like smoke. He responded with a polite, almost apologetic, "Forgive me, General. The rain makes the pigments difficult to manage." Zhao merely sneered. "Difficulty is a virtue you should cultivate, Wenren. A virtue absent in men of silk and ink." He then, with a casual disregard for propriety, lifted Li-Chen's paint stand and used it as a makeshift target for his guards, sending splattered hues of crimson and gold arcing through the air. Amidst this spectacle, a small figure intervened. Mei-Ling, a silk weaver renowned for her intricate designs, approached him, her face etched with concern. "General Zhao," she said, her voice soft but firm, "this is discourteous. He is providing a service to the city, and your behavior isn't becoming." Zhao scoffed. She's defending the trinket merchant. Don't let sentiment cloud your judgment, Mei-Ling. A man with no sword has no spine for the blade. He then, with a theatrical flourish, gestured for a guard to escort Li-Chen, ordering him to stand aside as Zhao mounted his warhorse. The guard, without hesitation, stepped forward and placed Li-Chen's paint stand beneath Zhao's foot, effectively using him as a makeshift step. Li-Chen felt a surge of anger, a primal instinct rising within him, urging him to react, to unleash the dragon within. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe, to maintain control. He knew that any display of his power, any hint of the Azure Dragon Fist would expose him, would draw the attention of those who coveted his abilities and his family's wealth. As Zhao prepared to ride away, a grim satisfaction radiating from his face, Li-Chen simply finished his plum blossom. A small, delicate gesture of defiance amidst the dust and the disdain. He knew this was not a battle he could win with brute force. This was a war of appearances, a careful dance of concealment. But he also knew, with a growing certainty, that the game was about to change. The rain continued to fall, washing away the ink and the iron, and for the first time since arriving in Chang'an, Li-Chen felt a tremor of anticipation, a subtle shift in the currents of fate. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Jade. The rain had ceased by mid-morning, leaving Chang'an draped in a slick, pearly sheen. The Western market, usually a chaotic cacophony of hawkers and haggling, held a subdued stillness. Li-Chen, his hands stained a deeper shade of indigo from the day's work, continued to meticulously render a new scroll depicting a phoenix rising from ashes. The image, a deliberate echo of his concealed power, garnered a small, appreciative crowd. He hadn't sought attention, but the skill of his brush, coupled with the inherent mystique of his quiet demeanor, drew a curious following. Mei-Ling, her fingers nimble as she wove silk threads into intricate patterns, sat beside him, meticulously sorting bolts of crimson and gold fabric. She offered him a piece of dried apricot, her small smile a silent reassurance. "You are exceptionally talented, Li-Chen," she observed, her voice soft. "It's as if the very spirit of the mountains flows through your brush." He took the apricot, the sweetness momentarily distracting him from the simmering resentment. Zhao's blatant disregard continued to prick at his patience. A contingent of his guards, clearly sent to monitor Li-Chen, were stationed just beyond the stalls, their faces impassive, their hands hovering near their swords. He kept his movements deliberate, a carefully constructed performance of humble artistry, all the while subtly registering their presence. The whispers began subtly, carried on the breeze. The merchants, a shadow, a burly blacksmith grumbled, wiping sweat from his brow. "He's hiding something. Saw him practicing forms, just a little different." "Aye," a silk merchant corroborated, glancing nervously at the guards. "A strange calmness about him, like he's holding a storm within." Li-Chen recognized the burgeoning speculation. Had been careful, of course, but the very possibility of his abilities was beginning to ignite a current of unease. He deepened his focus on the scroll, adding an almost imperceptible shimmer to the phoenix feathers, a subtle application of the Azure Dragon Fist's power, a test to gauge the reactions of those who observed. Suddenly, a shadowed figure detached itself from the throng. Lord Zhao, a member of the Imperial Bureau of Investigation, known for his ruthlessness and unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. He approached Li-Chen with a practiced air of detached scrutiny. "Li-Chen," Zhao said, his voice smooth and precise, "your calligraphy is remarkable. The Imperial Court has taken note of your work. A request has been made for a portrait of the Empress." Li-Chen's carefully constructed fade tightened. This was a calculated move, a bait designed to draw him further into the Imperial orbit. He accepted the offer, of course, but his response was carefully measured. "Thank you, Lord Zhao. I am honored. But my brush is simply a tool, responding to the inspiration of the moment." As he spoke, He subtly shifted his weight, his hand instinctively reaching for the concealed pouch at his belt, a pouch containing a single, exquisitely crafted jade pebble, a focusing agent for the Azure Dragon Fist. He felt the familiar thrum of energy begin to build within him, a silent plea for release. The Empress requests a portrait within the week, Jian continued, ignoring Li-Chen's carefully worded response. And it is imperative that you deliver. Furthermore, he paused, his eyes narrowed. We have received reports of unsettling incidents in the Western market, disturbances, injuries, seemingly accidental. We believe you may possess knowledge of these events. A cold knot formed in Li-Chen's stomach. But Jian was using the rumors, the suspicions, to tighten his grip. This was the game he was playing, exposing him, forcing him to reveal a sliver of his power, confirming the whispers. Just then, Mei-Ling intervened. Lord Jian, she said, her voice clear and steady. Li-Chen is a humble artist, dedicated to his craft. He has no involvement in the disturbances you speak of. He's a gentle soul, and I've known him only as a friend. Jian regarded Mei-Ling with a flicker of amusement. A friend, you say? An interesting choice of company for a man of mystery, Miss Mei-Ling. We will observe your friendship closely. He bowed slightly and moved on, his guards flanking him, a clear signal to the market to maintain a watchful eye on the street artist. As Jian departed, the murmuring in the market intensified. Li-Chen turned to Mei-Ling, his expression a mixture of frustration and gratitude. Has playing us, Mei-Ling. He knows. He knows about the Azure Dragon Fist, about my family's legacy. Mei-Ling's hand brushed against his. Then we must be more careful, she said, her eyes reflecting a steely resolve. But I suspect, she added, a faint smile playing on her lips, that this game is about to become far more interesting. She subtly reached into her sleeve and produced a small, intricately carved wooden dragon, a miniature echo of the power he held within. A little encouragement, Li-Chen. Chapter 3. The serpent's coil. The tension in the Western market hadn't dissipated with Jian's departure. It had simply coiled tighter, a venomous serpent constricting the air. Li-Chen felt it, a prickling awareness beneath his worn tunic, a constant reminder of the weight of his secret, and the calculating gaze of the Empire's most astute manipulator. Jian's amusement had been laced with a chilling understanding, a confirmation of his suspicions, and Li-Chen realized with a sinking dread that he hadn't merely been bait, he was a pawn in a far grander, far more dangerous game. Mei-Ling, however, remained an island of calm. Her small wooden dragon, cradled in her palm, seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. As using the rumors to discredit us, she said, her voice low, almost a murmur. The whispers of the Azure Dragon Fist, the tales of the Li house's wealth, their fuel for his ambition. He wants to paint us as a threat, a rebellion brewing in the heart of Chang'an. And what do we do? Li-Chen asked, his movements sharp with contained anxiety. He instinctively tightened his grip on his calligraphy brush, the worn wood a familiar comfort against his palm. Years spent meticulously crafting characters had honed a surprising level of control, a silent discipline he hadn't realized he possessed. We don't fight fire with fire, Mei-Ling replied, her eyes fixed on the distant rooftops. We appear to be compliant. We cultivate the image of the humble artist, the simple man with no political aspirations. We give him nothing to truly exploit. Suddenly, a shadow fell across them. General Zhao, his face flushed with fury, strode into the market square, flanked by a dozen heavily armed guards. He wasn't alone. Standing beside him, radiating an unsettlingly calm authority, was Lord Jian, his silk robes flowing around him like liquid jade. Well, well, Jian said, his voice a silken caress that held an undercurrent of steel. The artist finds himself in a rather unpleasant situation. I trust you've been enjoying your new role, Mr. Li-Chen. A humble footstool for the mighty General Zhao? Li-Chen ignored the jab, focusing on the subtle shifts in the crowd. The murmuring had intensified, a nervous current of speculation. He could feel the eyes of the market's inhabitants, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and outright hostility, fixed upon him. Zhao, sensing Li-Chen's restraint, pressed his advantage. "We've been receiving reports, Mr. Li-Chen, of unusual activity. Strange energy emanates from your workshop, a flickering blue light. Witnesses claim to have seen movements beyond the capabilities of a simple artist." He chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. "Perhaps you could enlighten us as to the source of these abilities?" Mei-Ling stepped forward, her posture radiating quiet dignity. "General Zhao," she said, her voice unwavering, "Li-Chen's artistic pursuits are his sole focus. He is a skilled craftsman, a man of peace. I assure you, there is nothing unusual about his workshop. The light you speak of is merely the reflection of the midday sun on his pigments." Chang'an merely observed, his expression unreadable. "A clever defense, Miss Mei-Ling. But words are merely shadows. We prefer to see for ourselves." He gestured to his guards, who immediately began to carefully examine Li-Chen's stall, running their hands along his canvases, probing his tools. As one guard reached for a particularly intricate scroll depicting a storm cloud, Li-Chen felt a surge of power, a raw, untamed energy building within him. It was a reflex, a primal instinct honed over countless years of training, a warning signal screaming at him to unleash the Azure Dragon Fist. But he held back, forcing himself to remain calm, to appear utterly bewildered and intimidated. Mei-Ling, sensing his struggle, subtly placed her hand over his. "Control yourself, Li-Chen," she whispered, her fingers tracing the lines of his palm. "Let him have nothing." Just as the guard was about to complete his examination, Mei-Ling acted. With a speed that seemed impossible, she snatched the scroll from his grasp, and with a swift, practiced movement, unfurled it. The storm cloud depicted within the scroll shimmered, the painted ink coalescing into a miniature vortex of swirling blue energy, a perfect, miniature echo of the Azure Dragon Fist. The effect was immediate. The guards froze, their weapons lowered. Even Zhao seemed momentarily taken aback. The sheer power displayed, contained within such a small object, was breathtaking. Chang'an, however, remained impassive. A slow smile spread across his face. "Impressive, Miss Mei-Ling," he said, his voice laced with genuine admiration. "You have a remarkable eye for detail, and an even more remarkable understanding of your friend's abilities." He turned to Li-Chen, his gaze unwavering. "It seems our little game has taken an unexpected turn. Tell me, Mr. Li-Chen, are you truly as unassuming as you appear?" Chapter 4. The Mirror of Azure. The air in the stall hung thick with stunned silence. Zhao, still sputtering with impotent rage, stood frozen, his hand hovering inches from his sword. The guards, a dozen of the Imperial Guard's finest, were similarly paralyzed, their faces a mask of bewildered awe. Even the merchants, who had been bustling around, gawking at Li-Chen's art, now stood transfixed, their chatter reduced to nervous whispers. Mei-Ling, however, was the center of attention. Her eyes, the color of jade flecked with gold, were wide with a mixture of understanding and burgeoning exhilaration. The miniature vortex, still pulsing with contained energy, had vanished, leaving only the unfinished calligraphy scroll now shimmering with a faint blue luminescence resting on the wooden table. Chang'an, the grizzled observant strategist, who had been silently observing the entire scene, finally broke the spell. "Remarkable," he repeated, his voice a low rumble. "You have revealed a secret that has been guarded for centuries. Miss Mei-Ling, you possess a startling intuition. Or perhaps," he added, a glint in his eye, a talent for recognizing potential that even the Li House's most astute advisors have missed. Li-Chen, still feeling the residual thrum of the Azure Dragon Fist within him, forced himself to breathe deeply, the training of a lifetime kicking in. He carefully lowered his hands, concealing the subtle tremors that still ran beneath his skin. It was a reflex, he managed, his voice carefully neutral. A surge of energy. I have been practicing diligently under the tutelage of Master Zhao, of the Zhao clan. The techniques are complex. He offered a weak, apologetic smile, hoping to project an image of bewildered innocence. Jian's smile widened, but it didn't touch his eyes. Indeed. And this complex technique involves harnessing a force capable of shattering iron with a single palm strike? Tell me, Mr. Li-Chen, how long have you been concealing this ability? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Li-Chen's carefully constructed fade began to crack. The years of subterfuge, the constant need to suppress his true power, weighed heavily upon him. He considered lying, claiming ignorance, playing the part of the frightened, unassuming artist. But something in Jian's unwavering gaze, a perceptive sharpness that saw straight through deception, made the lie feel impossible. For many years, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Since I was a boy. It began as a feeling, a warmth within me, a responsiveness to movement, to force. Master Zhao recognized it, trained me. He revealed the Azure Dragon Fist, but he forbade me from using it. He said it was a dangerous art, best left dormant. And you, Jian stated, his voice laced with quiet intensity, have been diligently suppressing it, concealing it behind this fade of a street artist. Li-Chen nodded slowly. I sought refuge in this life, he confessed, away from the machinations of my clan, the constant threat of assassination, the endless negotiations. The Azure Dragon Fist, it is a weapon of unparalleled power. It attracts unwanted attention. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the crowd. Counselor Lin, a notoriously ambitious member of the Imperial court, known for his ruthless efficiency and penchant for intrigue. He surveyed the scene with a critical eye, his face a mask of carefully controlled disapproval. Li-Chen, he boomed, his voice carrying across the market. What is the meaning of this spectacle? Are you attempting to incite rebellion? To challenge the authority of the emperor? Panic flared within Li-Chen. The emperor's court was notorious for its paranoia and quickness to react to perceived threats. He instinctively reached for the calming hand of Mei-Ling, who gently squeezed his. Counselor Lin, Mei-Ling said, her voice calm and measured. There is no need for alarm. This is simply a demonstration of a unique artistic technique. Mr. Li-Chen is a gifted calligrapher, and he has created a remarkable miniature representation of the Azure Dragon Fist. She gestured towards the scroll, allowing the miniature vortex to briefly re-emerge, bathing her hand in an ethereal blue light. John, however, didn't seem swayed by her explanation. He stepped forward, examining the scroll with an intensity that bordered on scrutiny. This is no mere artistic representation, Miss Mei-Ling, he declared. This is a conduit, a focused channel for immense power. The ink itself has been imbued with a specific alchemical compound, reacting with the flow of energy. Ingenious, truly ingenious. And you, it seems, were the key to unlocking it. He turned his attention back to Li-Chen. Mr. Li-Chen, he said, his voice now imbued with a subtle authority, you have revealed a great burden and a great potential. I believe it is time we spoke frankly. The Azure Dragon Fist is not a secret to be guarded. It is a responsibility to be wielded. And I intend to assist you in learning how to do so, not as a servant, but as a mentor. Li-Chen stared at him, stunned. He had expected judgment, condemnation, perhaps even imprisonment. He hadn't anticipated an offer of guidance. This unassuming street artist, this man who had spent years hiding in plain sight, was being offered a position of immense power, a chance to reshape the destiny of an empire. And it was all thanks to a quiet silk weaver and a miniature scroll shimmering with the power of the Azure Dragon Fist. Chapter 5. The Serpent's Coil. The rain had ceased, leaving Chang'an washed clean and smelling faintly of damp stone and incense. Li-Chen, still reeling from Jian's unexpected offer, found himself summoned to the ancient Li house's private gardens, a space he'd glimpsed only in faded tapestries depicting the dynasty's golden age. The gardens were a brutal contrast to the chaotic market, a carefully sculpted haven of towering pines, jade-paved pathways, and a central pool reflecting the bruised purple of the evening sky. Inside a pavilion overlooking the pool sat Master Jian, meticulously cleaning a jade staff, his movements precise and deliberate, like the unfurling of a silken ribbon. He didn't look up when Li-Chen entered, simply continued his work, a faint smile playing on his lips. The air itself felt different here, charged with an ancient energy that prickled against Li-Chen's skin. "You have been thoughtful, Mr. Li-Chen," Jian finally said without pausing his cleaning. "To reveal your heritage, to demonstrate the Azure Dragon Fist. It was a bold, perhaps even reckless move. But it has served its purpose. It has drawn attention to your potential, and more importantly, to mine." Li-Chen remained silent, attempting to reconcile the image of the renowned martial arts scholar with this quiet, almost meditative man. Had expected fiery condemnation from the Li house's elders, a frantic attempt to erase his existence, to bury the truth of the Azure Dragon Fist. Instead, he was being offered a partnership, a mentorship. "The Li house has long concealed its true strength," Jian continued, his voice gaining a low resonance. "For centuries, it has acted as a discreet hand, subtly influencing events, bolstering the emperor's legitimacy, and safeguarding the fist. But it has grown complacent, reliant on wealth and lineage, rather than the martial spirit. You, Mr. Li-Chen, represent a change." He gestured with the jade staff towards a large, ornately carved table where a collection of scrolls and strange implements lay spread out alchemical compounds in small, sealed vials, intricate wooden blocks, and shimmering fabrics woven with silver threads. "We have been studying the fist for generations, attempting to unlock its full potential. The key, we believed, lay not just in the technique, but in the preparation, in the channeling of energy through precise materials and focused intention." Li-Chen recognized some of the items: rare herbs from the dragon peaks, powdered meteorite, and pigments ground from ancient dragon scales. It was a scholar's laboratory, meticulously assembled, dedicated to understanding the very fabric of the Azure Dragon Fist. You, however, have demonstrated a unique understanding, a natural affinity. The miniature scroll, Miss Mei-Ling's influence. It was a revelation. The silk itself, woven with threads imbued with lunar energy, acted as a catalyst. Your hand, subconsciously directing your creative energy, became the conduit. He paused, his gaze piercing. "It's a rare phenomenon. Most practitioners require decades of rigorous training to achieve such control." Suddenly, a low, rhythmic chanting began, emanating from the depths of the gardens. The air grew colder, and a strange mist began to rise from the pool, swirling with faint blue luminescence. From the mist emerged three figures clad in dark, flowing robes, their faces concealed by ornate masks depicting coiled serpents. These were the Shadow Wardens, the Li house's elite guard, tasked with protecting the Azure Dragon Fist and ensuring its secrets remained hidden. "The council has convened," Zhao announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "They have observed your demonstration, analyzed the data, and, most importantly, they have agreed to your training. They believe you possess the potential to restore the Li house to its former glory." One of the Shadow Wardens stepped forward, presenting Li-Chen with a polished obsidian bracelet, intricately etched with the symbol of the Azure Dragon. "This," he intoned, "will enhance your control, amplifying your internal energy. But be warned, young heir. The Azure Dragon Fist is not a weapon to be wielded lightly. It demands respect, discipline, and a profound understanding of its power." As Li-Chen fastened the bracelet around his wrist, a surge of energy coursed through his body, a familiar yet intensified sensation. He could feel the latent power of the Azure Dragon Fist, buzzing beneath his skin, waiting to be unleashed. "We will begin with the fundamentals," Zhao said, breaking the tension. "You will learn to master your breathing, to refine your stance, to cultivate your internal energy. It will be a long and arduous journey, filled with challenges and setbacks. But I assure you, Mr. Li-Chen, with dedication and guidance, you will become a force to be reckoned with." He looked directly at Li-Chen, a glimmer of something akin to hope in his eyes. "This city, this empire, it needs someone like you. Someone who understands the true potential of the Azure Dragon Fist. And I intend to be the one who shows you how to use it." Chapter 6: Echoes of the Dragon. The training began with a silence that pressed down on Li-Chen. A silence more profound than the usual hubbub of the Shadow Warden's compound. Located within the crumbling remains of an ancient observatory overlooking Chang'an, the space pulsed with a subdued energy, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood and damp stone. The Wardens, a collection of scarred, silent figures, moved with a grace that belied their martial prowess, their eyes holding an ancient, watchful intelligence. Zhao, a man of granite build and a voice like finely worn steel, was their leader. He wasn't a flamboyant instructor. His teaching style was one of precise observation and subtle correction. Li-Chen quickly discovered that every gesture, every breath, every shift of weight was scrutinized, analyzed, and gently nudged towards perfection. Initially, it felt like a relentless, almost agonizing process. Li-Chen, accustomed to a life of comfortable distraction and strategic evasion, found himself struggling to quiet the restless energy that had been simmering beneath his adopted guise for months. "The Azure Dragon Fist," Zhao said, his voice measured, as Li-Chen attempted to mimic a basic stance. "The crane's embrace is not about brute force, young heir. It is about channeling the flow of qi within you, mirroring the movements of the dragon itself." He demonstrated, his movements fluid and economical, radiating an aura of calm power. "Imagine the river. It doesn't force its way through obstacles. It finds the path of least resistance, adapting to the terrain, carving its own course. You must do the same with your qi." The first few weeks were a brutal education in self-discipline. Li-Chen's attempts to conjure even the slightest flicker of internal energy resulted in strained muscles and a pounding headache. The Wardens offered no encouragement, only relentless feedback, a subtle correction of his posture, a murmured observation on the rhythm of his breathing. The constant pressure wore him down, a stark contrast to the easy flow of conversations an art-making head grown used to. He began to resent the constant scrutiny, the feeling of being perpetually judged, and, more acutely, the limitations he placed upon himself. "You are fighting the flow, Li-Chen," Zhao stated one afternoon, after Li-Chen had spent an hour attempting to create a stable vortex of energy. "You are resisting the natural resonance. Let it grow." Suddenly, a sharp, insistent pain shot through Li-Chen's arm, centered around the obsidian bracelet. He cried out, instinctively clenching his fist. Zhao immediately moved, placing a hand on Li-Chen's arm, guiding his movements. "Control," he commanded, his voice firm but not angry. "Focus your qi on the bracelet. Visualize the dragon, its power, its grace, its majesty." As Li-Chen concentrated, the pain subsided, replaced by a growing warmth. He focused on the intricate dragon carvings, imagining their power flowing through the bracelet, through his arm, and into his core. He felt a strange resonance, a connection to something ancient and immense. Then, without conscious effort, a tendril of azure energy erupted from his palm, a faint shimmering arc of light that danced in the air before dissipating. The Wardens were silent, their expressions unreadable. Only Zhao offered a single, approving nod. "Progress," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "A single echo of the dragon. Now, repeat." The next day, under Zhao's guidance, Li-Chen began working on the serpent's coil, a more advanced technique designed to accelerate the flow of qi. He found it infinitely more challenging. The movements demanded a delicate balance of power and control, a constant negotiation between yielding and resisting. Several times he lost control, unleashing a surge of uncontrolled energy that forced him to collapse in exhaustion. As he lay there gasping for breath, Mei-Ling entered the observatory. She had been following his progress, discreetly observing from a shadowed corner. She offered him a small, intricately carved jade vial filled with a fragrant herbal tea. "Drink," she said, her voice soft. "Rest. You are pushing yourself too hard, Li-Chen." Li-Chen accepted the tea gratefully, the coolness soothing his burned muscles. He looked up at Mei-Ling, a genuine smile gracing his face. "Thank you, Mei-Ling. You have a remarkable understanding of this art. It's calming to know that someone is watching over me." As he took a sip, a flicker of concern crossed Mei-Ling's face. "Li-Chen," she said, her voice low, "I believe you are withholding something from us." She paused, her eyes searching his. "You are not merely a street artist. The power you possess is far greater than you let on." The unspoken question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of hidden truths. Li-Chen knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. He took a deep breath, preparing to reveal a part of his past, a part that could shatter the fragile peace had painstakingly built. Chapter 7. The crack in the jade, the humid air of the observatory clung to Li-Chen like a damp shroud as he began to unravel the truth. Mei-Ling's words, sharp and unsettling, had stripped away the carefully constructed layers of his deception. The jade vial lay forgotten on the stone table, its fragrant tea untouched. He hadn't intended to reveal anything, not yet. He was still calibrating his return, slowly rebuilding his position. But Mei-Ling's intuition was a force he couldn't ignore. "You're right," he began, his voice low and strained. "There's a history to this, a lineage I've kept hidden." He took another, slower breath, the familiar tremor of anxiety rippling through him. He drew upon the Azure Dragon Fist, not to unleash its raw power, but to subtly ground himself, to center the chaotic energy within. It wasn't a display, but a necessary defense against the inevitable surge of panic. "I am Li-Chen, son of Lord Huai-Shen of the Laos." The words felt foreign, a polished gemstone pressed into unfamiliar hands. He watched Mei-Ling's reaction with a mixture of apprehension and a strange, burgeoning hope. Had been so careful, so meticulous in his camouflage, and yet she had seen through it. The silence hung thick, punctuated only by the chirping of unseen insects in the surrounding bamboo grove. Then, Mei-Ling's eyebrows rose in a slow, deliberate arc. "The Li House, the Azure Dragon Fist?" she repeated, her voice a hushed whisper. "It's been whispered about for generations, a myth, a legend. You're telling me you are the one?" He nodded, the movement conveying a profound weariness. "My father sought refuge in Chang'an after a devastating rebellion. The Li House, once a powerful military clan, was fractured and scattered. He believed the Azure Dragon Fist was the key to restoring our legacy, to rebuilding our strength." He paused, remembering his father's fierce ambition, his tragic downfall. "But the art is austan, demanding. It requires immense discipline, a constant understanding of internal energy, of qi. It's not a weapon to be wielded lightly, but a force to be mastered." He activated the fist again, this time deliberately, slowly. A faint blue aura shimmered around his hands, expanding outwards, not with the explosive force Head unleashed in the market, but with a controlled, pulsating rhythm. He focused on the Ents coil technique, visualizing the flow of qi, imagining the precise manipulation of energy. It was excruciatingly difficult, a constant battle against his own limitations. Mei-Ling watched him, her expression a study in fascination and concern. She didn't flinch, didn't recoil. Instead, she took a step closer, her eyes fixed on the shifting blue energy. "I've been studying you, Li-Chen," she said, her voice barely audible. "For weeks. I've seen the flashes of power, the moments of near collapse. You weren't simply practicing calligraphy, you were training, honing a skill far beyond anything a common artist could possess. Suddenly, a chilling realization dawned on Li-Chen. "You've been observing my practice?" he asked, his voice laced with a cautious suspicion. Mei-Ling nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I needed to understand, to know if the rumors were true, to assess the danger." She reached into her sleeve and produced a small, intricately carved jade amulet. It was shaped like a coiled dragon, the same blue energy had been manipulating swirling within its depths. "This belonged to my grandfather," she explained. "He was a scholar, a researcher of ancient martial arts. He believed the Azure Dragon Fist was not just a fighting style, but a path to enlightenment." As she spoke, a subtle shift occurred within Li-Chen. He felt a resonance with the amulet, a faint echo of the energy he was projecting. It was as if the jade was amplifying his power, strengthening his connection to the Azure Dragon Fist. But then, a sharp pain pierced his head, a blinding wave of disorientation. He stumbled back, clutching his temples, the blue energy flaring uncontrollably. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath, the Ents coil technique unraveling before his very eyes. Mei-Ling rushed to his side, placing the jade amulet against his forehead. "Slow down, Li-Chen," she urged, her voice filled with urgency. "You're pushing yourself too hard. The amulet, it's a key, a focus, but it also feeds your power, amplifies your weaknesses." As she touched him, a deeper understanding bloomed within Li-Chen. It wasn't just about mastering the Azure Dragon Fist, it was about controlling the flow of energy, about understanding the delicate balance between strength and vulnerability. He realized that Mei-Ling wasn't merely a kind silk weaver, she was a guardian, a scholar, a force to be reckoned with, and, perhaps, the key to unlocking the true potential of the divine warrior, who had disguised himself as a humble street artist. Chapter 8. Echoes of the Dragon. The air in Li-Chen's small studio, above the noodle shop, hung thick with the scent of ink and a lingering, disconcerting thrum of blue energy. The previous night's revelation had left him exhausted, not just physically, but mentally. The raw, untamed power of the Azure Dragon Fist, a chaotic storm within him. He lay propped against a stack of scrolls, Mei-Ling diligently applying a cool compress of dampened linen to his forehead. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, a stark contrast to the violent release had unleashed. "You're still fluctuating," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "The amulet isn't a simple amplifier, Li-Chen. It's a conduit, a tuning fork for your chi. When you force it, it resists, feeding the chaos. We need to understand its nature, its limitations." He managed a weak groan. It felt ancient, like the fist itself was awakening within me, but also fractured, like I was trying to hold a universe in my palm. Mei-Ling carefully removed the amulet, a smooth, palm-sized piece of jade carved with serpentine dragons, and examined it closely. "My grandfather's journals speak of this jade," she said, her voice hushed. "He called it the Dragon's Breath. It was forged in the heart of a volcanic eruption, infused with the essence of lightning. He theorized that it wasn't just a source of power, but a repository of the fist's lineage, the memories, the techniques, the very soul of generations of Azure Dragon wielders." She turned the amulet over in her hands, tracing the intricate carvings with a delicate finger. He believed that unlocking the fist's full potential required a deep connection with the jade, a resonance with the ancient warriors who came before. But he also warned of the danger of overstimulation. The dragon's breath can amplify not only your power, but also your vulnerabilities, your darkest instincts. Suddenly, a sharp, insistent pulse throbbed in Li-Chen's head. He clutched his temples again, the familiar wave of disorientation washing over him. This time, however, it wasn't solely a matter of exertion. There was something else present, a faint whisper, a phantom echo of movements and strategies. It was like a memory, not his own, but layered upon him, a martial technique fought with blinding speed and impossible precision. "Stop!" he gasped, pushing Mei-Ling's hand away. "I am saying a shadow. Dot see. Emil waften on one. He staggered to his feet, his vision blurring, and began to move, not with deliberate action but with a fragmented, instinctual dance. His movements were a chaotic blend of the Ents coil and the echoes had just witnessed. He shifted his weight, coiled his muscles, and launched a series of disjointed strikes, a low sweep, a rising palm, a blurring evasion. It was a grotesque parody of the Azure Dragon Fist, a dangerous, uncontrolled display of raw power. Mei-Ling reacted instantly, stepping aside with practiced grace, her movements informed by a surprising understanding of his chaotic movements. "You're lost in the past," she shouted. "You're letting the echoes drown you. The fist isn't a static technique, it's a flowing current. You must feel the rhythm, not simply replicate the movements." As she spoke, she reached out, and with a firm yet gentle hand, placed her own palm over his. A jolt of energy surged through him, not violent like before, but a steady, grounding current. It was as if she was anchoring him to the present, pulling him back from the swirling vortex of the past. "Focus," she commanded, her voice calm and unwavering. "Imagine the energy not as a weapon, but as a river. Flow with it, don't fight against it." He closed his eyes, concentrating with every fiber of his being. He pictured the Azure torrent, not as a raging storm, but as a powerful, controlled stream. He imagined himself as the channel, directing the flow, shaping the energy, not being consumed by it. Slowly, painstakingly, the chaotic movements subsided. The phantom echoes faded. When he opened his eyes, the blue energy within him was still present, but it was calmer, more controlled. He felt a nascent understanding, a glimmer of the true potential of the Azure Dragon Fist. I felt it," he whispered. "The flow. Thank you, Mei-Ling. I was so lost." Mei-Ling smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression that illuminated her face. "The Azure Dragon Fist is a profound tool, Li-Chen. But it's a tool best wielded with wisdom and restraint. Now let's begin to truly learn its secrets, not through forced awakening, but through patient understanding." She gestured towards a large, intricately carved table, a makeshift training area where, between commissions, he had begun to study ancient texts and diagrams. "We start with the foundations of equilibrium, the balance between attack and defense, between strength and vulnerability. And perhaps, with a little luck, we can finally unravel the full mystery of the dragon's breath." Chapter 9. Echoes of the Storm. The rain in Chang'an had a peculiar quality. It seemed to cling to the city like a restless spirit, a damp reminder of the Empire's simmering tensions. It fell in sheets as Li-Chen and Mei-Ling worked through the afternoon, meticulously copying a diagram of the dragon's coil formation from a crumbling scroll. The room, a cramped space above a tea shop in the heart of the Western Market, smelled of ink, damp paper, and the faint, lingering scent of Mei-Ling's silk dyes. Days had passed since the Lotus Festival, days filled with a cautious rebuilding. The initial shock of Li-Chen's unveiled power had given way to a fragile peace. General Zhao, humiliated and stripped of his authority, was a shadow of his former self, holed up in a ruined garrison on the outskirts of the city, nursing his pride and plotting revenge. The Imperial court, initially wary, now viewed Li-Chen with a mixture of awe and strategic interest. The Li House, revitalized by its newfound influence, began to subtly exert its wealth on the court, securing advantageous trade agreements and solidifying its position as a key patron. But for Li-Chen, the most significant shift wasn't political, it was within himself. Mei-Ling's guidance had begun to reveal the immense depth of the Azure Dragon Fist, but it wasn't simply about brute force. It was about control, about understanding the inherent chaos within the energy and channeling it with surgical precision. "The key, Li-Chen," Mei-Ling said, her voice soft but firm, as she demonstrated a series of slow, deliberate movements mimicking the flowing strokes of the dragon's coiled diagram, "is to visualize the flow, not as a destructive tempest, but as a river carving its path through stone. The stone resists, it challenges, but eventually the water finds its way. You must be the stone, firm and unwavering, but also yielding where necessary." Li-Chen focused on her movements, absorbing the rhythm, the subtle shifts in weight, the delicate control of his own internal energy. He attempted to follow her instructions, picturing the azure torrent within him as Mei-Ling described, but the familiar frustration began to creep in. The energy remained wild, prone to surging and collapsing, threatening to overwhelm him. It's like trying to hold water in my hands," he grunted, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The more I try to control it, the more chaotic it becomes." Mei-Ling paused, her hand resting gently on his arm. "You are fighting the flow, Li-Chen. You are imposing your will upon something ancient and powerful. Release that impulse. Let go. Feel the energy responding to your intention, not forcing it to obey." She led him through a series of breathing exercises, a carefully constructed sequence designed to center his mind and calm his spirit. As he followed her instructions, he began to notice a subtle shift. The frantic energy within him seemed to quiet, not completely vanished, but subdued, like a storm cloud gathering strength before releasing its rain. "Focus," she commanded, her voice calm and unwavering. "Imagine the energy not as a weapon, but as a river. Flow with it, don't fight against it." He closed his eyes, concentrating with every fiber of his being. He pictured the azure torrent, not as a raging storm, but as a powerful, controlled stream. He imagined himself as the channel, directing the flow, shaping the energy, not being consumed by it. Slowly, painstakingly, the phantom echoes faded. When he opened his eyes, the blue energy within him was still present, but it was calmer, more controlled. He felt a nascent understanding, a glimmer of the true potential of the Azure Dragon Fist. I felt it," he whispered. "The flow. Thank you, Mei-Ling. I was so lost." Mei-Ling smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression that illuminated her face. "The Azure Dragon Fist is a profound tool, Li-Chen, but it's a tool best wielded with wisdom and restraint. Now, let's begin to truly learn its secrets, not through forced awakening, but through patient understanding." She gestured towards a large, intricately carved table, a makeshift training area, where, between commissions, he had begun to study ancient texts and diagrams. "We start with the foundations of equilibrium, the balance between attack and defense, between strength and vulnerability. And perhaps, with a little luck, we can finally unravel the full mystery of the dragon's breath." As Li-Chen resumed his practice, a faint tremor ran through the room. A shadow flickered in the doorway. It wasn't Zhao, but a young boy, no older than 10, clutching a worn leather pouch. He approached with hesitant steps, dropping a small, intricately carved jade dragon onto the table. "My father," the boy stammered, "said you were a protector. He sent this. He said the dragon's breath could heal." Li-Chen looked at the jade dragon, then at Mei-Ling, a new layer of complexity entering his understanding of the Azure Dragon Fist. The legend wasn't just about destruction, it hinted at something far more profound, a power capable of both creation and profound healing. The journey had just begun, and he realized, with a growing sense of urgency, that the secrets of the Azure Dragon Fist were far more complex and far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Chapter 10. Echoes of the Storm. The jade dragon sat on the table, radiating a faint, cool warmth. It wasn't a dazzling display of power, not the immediate explosive release of the Azure Dragon Fist, but a subtle resonance, a gentle hum that seemed to vibrate with the room's quiet energy. Li-Chen picked it up, turning the intricate carving in his fingers. The jade wasn't simply sculpted, it felt alive, as though holding a trapped spark of the very mountain winds. "This is remarkable," he murmured, his voice low, studying the dragon's detailed scales. The lighthouse artisans used jade for seals, but never with this level of attunement. He turned to Mei-Ling, who was watching him with a mixture of apprehension and fascination. "This boy, he speaks of healing. It suggests a different facet to the dragon's breath, one that has been deliberately concealed for centuries." The boy, whose name was Zhao, remained by the doorway, his eyes wide with a nervous energy that mirrored Li-Chen's own. His father, old Master Lin, was a recluse, a herbalist who lived on the fringes of Chang'an, specializing in remedies for the afflicted. Had been a respected figure, known for his skill and discretion, but rumors had always swirled around him, whispers of ancient knowledge, of connections to forgotten lineages, and a peculiar aversion to interacting with the Imperial court. "My father always said the Azure Dragon Fist was a tempest," Zhao continued, clutching his pouch tighter. "A beautiful, terrible storm that could cleanse and destroy. He warned me that seeking its power was like inviting a flood." Li-Chen nodded, absorbing Zhao's words. The ancients understood that power without control is a weapon waiting to be unleashed. The key isn't just raw force, but understanding the flow, the intention behind the strike. He began to gently manipulate the jade dragon, focusing his internal energy, mimicking the movements had been practicing with Mei-Ling, the slow, deliberate shifts of weight, the subtle curling of his fingers, the focused projection of his chi. A faint blue glow began to emanate from the dragon's eyes, intensifying as Li-Chen deepened his concentration. The tremor that had initially manifested in the room grew stronger, and a strange scent filled the air, not the sharp, earthy fragrance of herbs, but something akin to ozone and distant rain. Suddenly Mei-Ling gasped, stumbling back slightly. "Li-Chen, be careful!" she cried, her voice laced with a fear she couldn't quite conceal. "You're drawing too much power." He paused, realizing she was right. The Azure Dragon Fist wasn't a simple exertion of force. It was a delicate dance, a channeling of cosmic energy, and he was still a novice. But Zhao's words, coupled with the jade dragon's subtle resonance, had shifted his understanding. This wasn't about destruction, it was about balance, about harmonizing with the energies of the world. As he resumed, this time with a renewed sense of control, the blue glow intensified, swirling around the dragon like a miniature storm. He focused on Zhao's words, visualizing not a destructive force, but a restorative one. He imagined the flow of energy, not as a jagged spear aimed at a target, but as a soothing balm, capable of mending wounds and alleviating suffering. Then, something astonishing happened. A series of faint images flashed through his mind, snippets of memories, not his own, but fragmented glimpses of past events. He saw a warrior, centuries ago, healing a gravely wounded soldier during a siege, the Azure Dragon Fist radiating a warm golden light. He witnessed a village ravaged by a plague, the same energy cleansing the infected and restoring health. He saw a young woman, weeping over a stillborn child, the dragon's breath knitting the child back into existence. The visions were fleeting, overwhelming, and intensely emotional. He felt the weight of countless lives, the joy of restoration, the agony of loss. The room filled with the scent of wildflowers and rain. When the images faded, he collapsed, gasping for breath, his body slick with a cold sweat. Mei-Ling rushed to his side, her hand trembling as she gently touched his forehead. "Li-Chen, are you all right?" He sat up, dazed, staring at the jade dragon. I saw things," he whispered, struggling to articulate the experience. The dragon's breath isn't just about destruction. It's about life itself. It holds the power to not just heal the body, but the spirit. Suddenly, a chilling realization dawned on him. The visions hadn't come randomly. They had been invited. The dragon, the boy, the fragmented memories, they were all connected. The Li house wasn't just guarding the Azure Dragon Fist, he said, his voice filled with a growing sense of dread. They were safeguarding a legacy, a lineage of healers who had deliberately suppressed this aspect of the art. It was a secret deliberately hidden, locked away for a reason. He looked at Mei-Ling, her eyes wide with understanding. And I suspect, he added, his gaze fixed on the Jade Dragon, that this legacy holds secrets far more dangerous than we can possibly imagine. Chapter 11. Echoes of the Jade Dragon. The silence in the Li house's hidden chamber was thick with the aftermath of Li-Chen's revelation. Sunlight, fractured by stained glass depicting mythical dragons, cast shifting patterns on the worn stone floor. Mei-Ling, still clutching a cooling cloth to his forehead, regarded him with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The Jade Dragon, nestled on a pedestal carved with ancient runes, pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible blue light, a reflection, perhaps, of the power that resided within him. "You believe," she began, her voice hesitant, "that our ancestors deliberately concealed this healing aspect of the Azure Dragon Fist?" Li-Chen nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. The murals we've unearthed, they depict not just displays of devastating power, but also scenes of shimmering blue energy mending shattered bones, soothing burns, even calming the afflicted mind. But these scenes were always overlaid with warnings, with a stark emphasis on control, on the devastating potential of unrestrained force. It felt curated, like a precious jewel partially hidden behind a thick curtain. He ran a hand over the smooth surface of the Jade Dragon, a strange tingling sensation running through his fingertips. The visions. They weren't just glimpses of past masters. They were echoes, remnants of the original practitioners, desperately trying to impart their knowledge, to stop someone from unleashing a power they couldn't comprehend. Suddenly, a low rumble reverberated through the chamber, shaking the very foundations. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the Jade Dragon pulsed with an intense, almost blinding blue light. Li-Chen instinctively raised his hand, feeling a surge of energy building within him, a raw, untamed force that both terrified and exhilarated him. He focused, channeling the feeling, and a delicate, shimmering blue light began to emanate from his palms, swirling around a shattered fragment of pottery on the floor. The crack vanished, the pottery seamlessly reforming as if it had never been broken. Mei-Ling gasped, stepping back. You healed it. With the Azure Dragon Fist. It's more than simply redirecting energy, Li-Chen explained, his voice strained. I'm not just breaking and rebuilding. I'm resonating with the life force, the inherent energy of things. It's a profoundly intimate connection. Just then, a voice, brittle and ancient, echoed within his mind. Control restraint. The dragon's breath is a double-edged sword. Unchecked, it consumes. Use it wisely, young heir. The voice vanished as abruptly as it appeared, leaving Li-Chen breathless and disoriented. He stumbled back, clutching his head. That wasn't a voice I heard. It was a memory. A feeling. The dragon, it's communicating with me. Mei-Ling, recovering her composure, cautiously approached him. The ancient texts spoke of resonance, a symbiotic relationship between the warrior and the Azure Dragon Fist. It seems this connection is far deeper than we imagined. As she spoke, a new image flashed through his mind, a sprawling subterranean chamber filled with intricate murals depicting figures clad in flowing azure robes, meticulously cultivating this resonant connection. They weren't merely fighting, they were nurturing, healing, and absorbing the very life force of the land. They weren't simply warriors, Li-Chen murmured, his eyes widening. They were guardians of the land's vitality. They understood that true power wasn't about domination, but about balance. The blue light emanating from the jade dragon intensified, and a strange warmth spread through the chamber. He realized that the visions weren't just echoes of the past, they were actively shaping his understanding of the Azure Dragon Fist. He felt a surge of instinct, a primal understanding of how to manipulate this energy, not just for offense, but for profound healing. But why the suppression? He asked, his voice filled with a growing sense of urgency. Why did the Li house deliberately bury this legacy? Another voice, colder and laced with bitterness, echoed in his mind. The dragon's breath is a catalyst. It can awaken dormant energies, heal grievous wounds, but it can also amplify darkness, corrupt the soul. The chaos it can unleash is far greater than any single man could control. The blue light pulsed violently, and a dark shadow flickered in the periphery of his vision. He instinctively raised his hand, channeling the Azure Dragon Fist, and the shadow recoiled, dissipating into nothingness. "Someone or something doesn't want us to unlock this potential," Li-Chen said, his face grim. "Someone knows the truth about the dragon's breath, and they're actively working to keep it hidden." He looked at Mei-Ling, his eyes filled with a new resolve. "We have a long and dangerous journey ahead of us." Chapter 12. Echoes in the Jade. The morning after the Lotus Festival dawned with an uneasy stillness in Chang'an. The usual cacophony of the Western market, the hawkers, the merchants, the bleating of goats was muted, replaced by a palpable tension, a feeling of something profoundly shifted beneath the surface of the bustling city. Li-Chen, after a restless night spent poring over ancient texts in the restored Li House library, felt it keenly. The air itself seemed to hum with an energy he was only beginning to comprehend. Mei-Ling, surprisingly, was the first to break the silence. She arrived with a small basket overflowing with freshly woven silk scarves, a splash of vibrant blues and greens against the gray stone of the house's entrance. "You've been lost in the scrolls again, Li-Chen," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "You barely touched your breakfast." "I've been piecing together fragments," he replied, gesturing to a particularly worn volume bound in dragonhide. The Li house wasn't merely suppressing the Azure Dragon Fist, they were containing it. The writings detail a catastrophic event, centuries ago, when a Li house warrior, consumed by ambition, attempted to fully unleash the dragon's breath, the raw, untamed power of the fist, to conquer a rival kingdom. The result was not victory, but devastation. The land itself wept for days, rivers turned to poison, and the very air crackled with uncontrolled energy. The elders, in their wisdom, realized the potential for annihilation was too great. He closed the book with a snap, the sound echoing in the quiet chamber. They created a system of suppression, a deliberate dilution of the dragon's breath, meant to limit its scope and make it controllable. But the suppression itself, this subtle dampening, was weakening the lineage, blurring the connection to the true power. Mei-Ling carefully laid out the silk scarves, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns. So, Zhao and his men weren't simply motivated by greed and ambition. They were responding to something? "Precisely," Li-Chen said, his gaze drifting towards the jade dragon amulet he wore beneath his simple tunic. The amulet pulsed with a faint, rhythmic blue light, responding to his own burgeoning power. "The visions I've been experiencing, the echoes of the past, they aren't just historical accounts. They're reminders, warnings. The shadow I sensed that night, the one that recoiled from the dragon's breath, wasn't just a trick of the light. It was a presence, something ancient and malevolent, actively guarding this knowledge." Suddenly, a sharp rap at the door startled them both. A gruff-faced officer, Sergeant Zhao, entered, his face grim. "Lord Li-Chen, a messenger from the Imperial court. Urgent business." The messenger, a wiry man in the scarlet robes of the Imperial Guard, wasted no time. "Your lordship, General Zhao's clan, has been swiftly dealt with." His remnants are being escorted to the northern wastes as decreed. However, we have intercepted a coded message, recovered from a hidden cache within the former Zhao stronghold. It details an obsession with the Azure Dragon Fist. It speaks of a sleeping serpent and a Kie-specific lineage of Lighthouse warriors, believed to hold the key to unlocking the dragon's breath. He paused, glancing nervously around the room. The message also mentions a place, a forgotten temple hidden within the Dragon Peaks, known as the Jade Maw.E. Legend says it was where the first Azure Dragon Fist was honed. Li-Chen's eyes narrowed. The Jade Maw, I've read about it. It's said to be a nexus of raw, untamed energy, a place where the veil between realms is thin. He turned to Mei-Ling, a grim determination etched on his face. This confirms my suspicions. Someone is deliberately trying to awaken the dragon's breath. But why? Before he could delve further, a piercing shriek echoed through the house. It was Mei-Ling. She was standing by the window, staring out at the market with an expression of horror. "The Weavers' Guild," she cried, her voice strained. They've been attacked. All the weavers, including my father, they've vanished. Only chaos remains. Li-Chen felt a surge of icy dread. The ripples from the shattered stability of Chang'an were spreading, and he realized, with terrifying clarity, that the pursuit of the Azure Dragon Fist wasn't simply about controlling a powerful weapon. It was about a conflict far older, far darker than he had ever imagined. "We have to move," he said, drawing the Jade Dragon amulet. "The Jade Maw awaits, and I believe we are no longer simply uncovering a legacy. We are walking straight into a war." Chapter 13. The Weavers stain the air in Li-Chen's study crackled with a nervous energy, thick and cloying like the incense perpetually burning in the corners. Mei-Ling's frantic report had ripped a hole in the carefully constructed facade of his life as a simple artist, revealing a darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. The vanished weavers, the sudden chaos in the heart of Chang'an. It wasn't just a localized incident, it was a symptom, a malignant pulse emanating from the very source of the Azure Dragon Fist. "The Weavers' Guild," Li-Chen murmured, tracing the serpentine design of the Jade Dragon amulet nestled in his palm. "It's a deliberate distraction. Someone wants us focused here, while they consolidate their power." He glanced at Mei-Ling, her face pale with a horror she couldn't articulate. The intricate silk she'd been weaving abandoned on the table. The scroll spoke of a Kia lineage, a specific bloodline of the Lighthouse warriors believed to hold the key to unlocking the dragon's breath. "It's not just about the power, Mei-Ling. It's about control. Control of that energy. Control of this city." He swiftly dispatched a pair of his most trusted retainers, men had quietly recruited from the edges of the house's operations. A former Imperial Guard officer, scarred and pragmatic, and a young scholar skilled in the subtle art of information gathering. Secure a full report on the Weavers' Guild. Their entire operation, their connections, everything. I want to know who benefited from their disappearance. As they moved to execute his orders, the quiet of the study was shattered by a harsh, guttural voice. General Zhao, accompanied by a contingent of heavily armed guardsmen who had once been dismissive of Li-Chen, now clearly fearful, burst through the door, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Li-Chen," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You dare to dabble in matters beyond your station. The Imperial Court has heard of your indiscretion. It has learned of your interference." Li-Chen remained impassive, his hand never leaving the hilt of his dao. "You presume a great deal, General. Interference is precisely what you have provoked." He recognized the shift in Zhao's demeanor. The warlord was playing a dangerous game, attempting to leverage the Imperial Court's interest against him, hoping to paint him as a rebellious element. "The Imperial investigator, Lord Feng, has arrived," Zhao continued, a sneer twisting his features. "He's here to oversee your artistic pursuits and ensure you remain a harmless spectacle." He will also be assessing the circumstances surrounding the Weavers' Guild. Before Zhao could issue further threats, Li-Chen moved. It wasn't a show of force, not yet. It was a demonstration of control, a subtle shift in the air that silenced the guards, a reminder of the power that lay dormant within him. A wave of azure energy, barely perceptible at first, rippled outwards from his hand, washing over the room, momentarily disrupting the incense smoke and causing the shadows to deepen. Zhao and his men recoiled instinctively, their bravado momentarily evaporated. "You underestimate me, General," Li-Chen said, his voice calm but firm. "I am not a mere street artist. I am the heir to the Li House, and I have a vested interest in ensuring the stability of this empire." Lord Feng, a man of imposing stature and even more imposing bearing, entered the room, his dark eyes scanning Li-Chen with an unsettling intensity. "The rumors are true, then?" The ink-stained hands wield a power far exceeding mere artistry. "The truth, Lord Feng, is often more complicated than the rumors," Li-Chen replied, subtly activating the Azure Dragon Fist, the internal energy flowing through him like a living river. He didn't attack, but the air around him thrummed with barely contained potential. Suddenly, a low, resonant hum filled the room, growing in intensity. Mei-Ling cried out, clutching her head as a sharp pain lanced through her temples. "The jade!" she gasped, pointing to the amulet around Li-Chen's neck. "It's reacting. The energy is amplifying." Li-Chen felt it too, the sudden surge of power, a dizzying torrent threatening to overwhelm him. The Jade Maw, the Forgotten Temple, the nexus of raw energy wasn't just a legend. It was resonating, drawing upon the latent power of the Azure Dragon Fist, and it was reacting to something, or someone. "Zhao, you've drawn us into a trap," Li-Chen snarled, unleashing a controlled burst of azure energy that knocked the general off his feet. The Weavers' Guild wasn't a distraction. It was a probe. Someone is testing the strength of the dragon's breath, gauging its influence. As Zhao lay stunned on the floor, Mei-Ling, despite her disorientation, noticed a faint stain spreading across the silk. She had been working on a delicate pattern of crimson blossoms. "The silk," she whispered, her voice filled with dread. "It's tainted. The Weavers' Guild's diet's been replaced with something dark." The realization hit Li-Chen with the force of a physical blow. The disappearance of the Weavers wasn't a random act of violence. It was a ritual, a sacrifice, and the Weavers' Guild, it seemed, had become unwitting players in a far more sinister game. The investigation of the Guild was no longer simply about finding the missing. It was about understanding the nature of the stain, and the hand that had painted it upon the fabric of Chang'an. Chapter 14. Crimson threads. The rain in Chang'an had settled into a persistent, sullen drizzle, mirroring the oppressive atmosphere that clung to the Li House. The revelation of Li-Chen's true lineage had sent ripples of disbelief and simmering resentment through the Imperial court, while the immediate removal of General Zhao and his clan had secured the city's peace. The underlying currents of suspicion and fear had intensified, fueled by the unsettling discovery of the Weavers' Guild's transformation and the unnerving echo of the Jade Maw's power. Mei-Ling, recovering slowly from the surge of energy, spent her days meticulously examining the tainted silk. Her nimble fingers, normally deft with the shuttle, now traced the crimson blossoms with a grim fascination. "The dye is unlike anything I've ever encountered," she reported to Li-Chen, who was diligently training in the courtyard, the Azure Dragon Fist manifesting as a shifting dance of blue light. "It's not derived from any known plant. Its composition, it's almost metallic, and it resonates with a coldness, a void that chills me to the bone." Li-Chen, honed by weeks of suppressed training and fueled by a growing sense of urgency, acknowledged her findings with a curt nod. The Jade Maw's resonance wasn't merely accidental. Someone deliberately activated it, seeking to amplify the dragon's breath. But why? And why use the Weavers' Guild as the catalyst? He paused, focusing his energy, and visualized the intricate movements of the Azure Dragon Fist. The air around him shimmered with azure light, coalescing into a swirling vortex that threatened to consume him. Zhao suspected we were more than mere artists. He was correct, though his suspicions were born of ignorance, not malice. This feels orchestrated, like a grand game played by unseen hands. The Imperial scholars, summoned from the Grand Library, offered a theory that was both unsettling and vaguely familiar. They unearthed fragments of ancient texts detailing the Crimson Order, a clandestine sect obsessed with harnessing potent energies through ritualistic sacrifice, primarily involving textiles imbued with life force. The texts spoke of a thread of shadow, capable of absorbing and distorting magical energy, and a corresponding ink of binding, used to seal and control those afflicted by its touch. The Weavers' Guild possessed the ink of binding, Master Chang'an, the leading scholar explained, adjusting his spectacles. A potent ingredient, rarely seen, used in the creation of certain protective charms. It's been replaced, subtly, with this ink of shadow, and the resulting effect is catastrophic. It's drawing upon the dragon's breath, corrupting it, amplifying its chaotic potential. As Master Chang'an spoke, a low, rhythmic chanting drifted from the shadows of the ancient academy. Li-Chen, instinctively aware of a shift in the flow of energy, moved silently towards the source, Mei-Ling close behind. The chanting led them to the academy's hidden eastern wing, a chamber long forgotten, filled with decaying scrolls and archaic instruments. There, amidst a circle of crimson-stained stones, stood old Master Zhao, the academy's head instructor, his eyes glazed with an unsettling serenity. He was surrounded by a group of young initiates, all clad in indigo robes, their faces etched with a strange fervor. They were meticulously recreating a complex tapestry depicting scenes of cosmic chaos, swirling storms, collapsing mountains, and monstrous creatures writhing in agony. Each stitch was imbued with a subtle, pulsing energy, and the crimson blossoms from Mei-Ling's silk were meticulously incorporated into the design. Master Zhao! Li-Chen boomed, the Azure Dragon Fist erupting around him, a blinding torrent of blue energy. What is the meaning of this ritual? Master Zhao didn't flinch. He merely continued chanting, his voice a hypnotic drone. We are weaving the fate of the Empire, Li-Chen. We are shaping the dragon's breath into a weapon capable of shattering the foundations of the corrupt. Suddenly, one of the initiates, a young man named Lin, stepped forward, holding aloft a small, intricately carved jade pendant, identical to the one Li-Chen wore. The Jade Maw responds to this, Lin said, his voice filled with unnerving conviction. It craves the energy of chaos. It seeks to absorb the darkness and reform it. As Lin spoke, the crimson blossoms on the tapestry began to writhe and expand, consuming the entire chamber in a wave of scarlet light. Li-Chen realized with sickening clarity they weren't just observing the chaos, they were actively fueling it. And the Weavers' Guild, the tainted silk, the stolen dye, were all carefully crafted threads in a far more sinister design, orchestrated not by a single hand, but by the very essence of the Crimson Order. The game had truly begun. Chapter 15. The Crimson Thread. The air in the Weavers' Guild chamber hung thick with the scent of sandalwood and a subtle, unsettling sweetness, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. The scarlet light emanating from the tapestry had subsided, leaving behind a residue of shimmering crimson dust that clung to the walls and painted grotesque shadows on the faces of the assembled initiates. The chanting of Master Zhao had ceased, replaced by an unnerving silence broken only by the crackle of residual energy. Li-Chen stood rigid, the Jade Maw, a cold weight against his chest, pulsing with a disturbing warmth. He felt a drain, not of physical strength, but of something far more fundamental: his control. The raw, untamed power of the Azure Dragon Fist felt less like a weapon and more like a current threatening to sweep him away. Explain yourselves, Li-Chen demanded, his voice low and dangerous, the ink-stained fingers of a street artist momentarily forgotten. What is the Crimson Order? And why were we weaving chaos, not protection? Master Zhao's face, usually a mask of serene concentration, was now etched with a chilling awareness. The Crimson Order, he finally said, his voice a brittle whisper, is not a single entity, Li-Chen. It is a resonance, an echo of the primordial chaos that predates even the Empire. It feeds on discord, on despair, on the unraveling of order. For centuries, they've sought to awaken this force, to use it as a catalyst for upheaval, a tool for dismantling the established world. He gestured towards the tapestry, now subtly shifting, the swirling storms within seeming to coalesce into darker, more defined shapes. The crimson blossoms are not merely decorative. They are conduits, imbued with the raw energy of the Jade Maw. We were not observing chaos, we were cultivating it. Each stitch, each drop of Mei-Ling's crimson silk amplified the latent instability within this chamber, drawing the order closer. Across the room, Lin, the young initiate who had spoken of the Jade Maw, stepped forward. His eyes, normally bright with youthful fervor, held a disconcerting, almost predatory gleam. The Jade Maw doesn't seek to absorb darkness, he said, his voice gaining a hypnotic quality. It creates it. It thrives on the absence of balance, on the void left by shattered ideals. The Crimson Order has been subtly manipulating events for generations, fomenting rebellions, poisoning alliances, sowing seeds of distrust within the Imperial court. They haven't been aiming for conquest, Li-Chen. They've been aiming for deconstruction. Suddenly, a low guttural laugh echoed through the chamber. It emanated from the back of the room, from a figure shrouded in deep indigo robes, Silas, the guildmaster, a man who had always seemed a quiet, almost melancholy presence. Now his face was contorted in a chillingly satisfied grin. Clever boy, Lin, Silas rasped, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. You understand the beauty of it all. We weren't simply weaving chaos, we were weaving possibility. The chaos within the tapestry represents the potential for a new order, an order forged not in the rigid constraints of the Empire, but in the raw, untamed flow of the universe. He raised a hand, revealing a small, intricately carved silver mirror, reflecting the chaotic scene. The Azure Dragon Fist is a magnificent weapon, Li-Chen, but it's built on the principles of order. The Crimson Order, however, it thrives on dismantling order. Your strength is a threat to us, a beacon that draws them closer. And you, my dear heir, are the key. As Silas spoke, Mei-Ling, who had been silent until now, moved with a speed that belied her gentle appearance. She intercepted Silas' outstretched hand, snatching the mirror before he could fully grasp it. A silent struggle ensued, a whirlwind of silk and practiced movements, until Mei-Ling, with a swift, decisive strike, disarmed him, sending the mirror clattering to the stone floor. You revel in destruction, Silas, she said, her voice surprisingly firm, but you misunderstand the nature of power. True power is not found in chaos, but in control. As she spoke, a strange phenomenon occurred. The crimson dust swirling around the tapestry began to coalesce, forming a shimmering, serpentine form that writhed with an almost sentient energy. It lunged towards Mei-Ling, and instinctively, she drew upon the Azure Dragon Fist, unleashing a concentrated burst of blue energy that shattered the serpentine form into 1,000 iridescent fragments. Li-Chen watched, stunned, as the fragmented energy rapidly reformed into a swirling vortex, drawn directly towards the Jade Maw on his chest. The pounding in his head intensified, a dizzying sensation of being pulled apart, of his very being destabilizing. He realized with horror that the Crimson Order wasn't just manipulating events, they were feeding upon his power, attempting to unravel the meticulously crafted control he had spent years honing. The Maw seeks to consume you, Li-Chen, Master Zhao shouted over the intensifying chaos. Its purpose is not simply to absorb darkness, but to absorb you, your strength, your will, your very soul. The jade maw pulsed violently, threatening to overwhelm him. Li-Chen, desperately struggling to maintain control, focused his will, channeling the raw energy of the Azure Dragon Fist. He had to break this connection, sever the thread of the Crimson Order before it consumed him entirely. But as he prepared to unleash a full-scale assault, he realized, with chilling certainty, that the battle wasn't just for his life, it was for the fate of the Empire, and perhaps for the very soul of ancient China.